Pokémon Emerald. There were way too many reasons to love this game when it came out, and it was exciting as this was the first time that the third game was more than just a little different. But that was 10 years ago. Now we're in the era of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Game Freak really did break some old barriers with this game, which shows progress on their part, and it can only get better from here for Pokemon. But hey, while on that topic, one of the biggest questions I'm being asked about upcoming games is whether Oraz will be joined by a Pokemon Emerald remake as well, considering it followed a slightly different storyline. That seems pretty reasonable, doesn't it? The more different Emerald is, the higher chance of it getting its own remake. But first off, I don't work at Game Freak. Really, I don't work for Game Freak, so while I can speculate down to the core on what I believe, I can't be sure. I mean, even if it doesn't make sense, if Game Freak knows that spending less time to modify Oraz into Delta Emerald will be worth it both in making them more money and stalling us for their next game without damaging their brand, then I don't see the problem, why not? But with that being said, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this question, so to end all debate, let's speculate. Wow. Take a look back. Unlike Pokemon Yellow and Crystal, Pokemon Emerald was the first follow-up game to not only feature a different legendary as the prominent one, but also quite a big change to the plot, so there's nothing wrong with thinking that Emerald may be remade despite the fact that Yellow and Crystal weren't. And it probably wouldn't have been such a controversial topic if there weren't a bunch of quote-unquote hints floating around. This all started with the name Pokemon Delta Emerald being trademarked a few weeks after Oraz was announced. Trademarking over the years has seemed to link to future editions, like before X and Y came out, all of these names were renewed. Notice something? Almost all of the Pokemon listed here had received a Mega Evolution in X and Y, with some of them carrying on to Oraz like Primal Kyogre, Primal Groudon, and Mega Rayquaza. So Delta Emerald being trademarked seems like a good start, doesn't it? Well, something to note is that the Delta Emerald trademark was actually sent in early May of 2014, a few days before the official Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire announcement, which makes it seem like a last-minute decision to protect the name of the would-be follow-up. This has been done a ton of times in the past, like in early 2009, where Pokemon trademarked Pokemon Black, White, Gray, Brown, Purple, Crimson, and Scarlet. Not only did they claim Black and White 2 years before it came out, but they also trademarked a ton of other names to protect relevant would-be titles, the most popular being Pokemon Gray. What I'm trying to say here is that Delta Emerald being trademarked doesn't necessarily mean it's in the works. Let's start off with this. What's the difference between the original Ruby and Sapphire and Pokemon Emerald? Not small things like a little girl standing here instead of a little boy. For one, Steven had to go look for more rocks, so Wallace is fought as the champion of the game, while taking his place as the 8th gym leader. In the plot, instead of Kyogre or Groudon being awakened, Team Aqua and Magma put the whole world at risk by awakening both Kyogre and Groudon, giving Rayquaza the prominent role as the one to save the world. And finally, there are events exclusive to only Pokemon Emerald and fairly good, like the Naval Rock, Faraway Island, and Birth Island events. Now fast forward to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. If there are notable differences between the two original games and its sister game, then the remake will include elements from it as well. Take Heart Gold and Soul Silver for example, which features Yuuzin and gives Suicune a bigger focus, something that was exclusive to Pokemon Crystal. But if the differences are major enough as they are with Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald, it would make sense for it to have its own game instead of featuring in the remake. And that is why it is argued that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire included almost nothing from the original Emerald to save that content for its own remake, Delta Emerald. But are you sure about that? These were the major differences between the original Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald. Emerald gave Rayquaza the prominent role by making it stop the fight between Kyogre and Groudon, added more events like the Birth Island event, and had minor plot changes like Wallace being fought as the champion. Now, while the main story of Oraz didn't include any of this, after you beat the game, you were faced with the Delta episode that nobody seemed to pick up the purpose of. The way the Delta episode is introduced and brought into the plot, it almost seems like its own extension, like a DLC. Just look at how it starts when you beat the game. It's actually announced like it's separate from the rest of the game. You know why though? Because it is. The Delta episode's plot is about a meteor approaching the Earth big enough to destroy the Hoenn region. It's up to you to stop it, and at the end, Xenia aids you in climbing Sky Pillar and capturing Rayquaza to fly into space and destroy the threat. It may not be clear right now, but the Delta episode was pretty much Delta Emerald added in as an extension instead of its own game. In the Delta episode, Rayquaza is given the prominent role as the one to save the world, and you have to climb Sky Pillar to awaken it. When you attempt to climb Sky Pillar, you're stopped by Wallace, who challenges you under the title of a Pseudopolitan. But what you don't see is that you're actually battling Wallace's team as the champion directly from Pokemon Emerald. Once you climb Sky Pillar, you fly on the back of Mega Rayquaza to destroy the meteor holding Deoxys, which is actually the equivalent of the Birth Island event from the dimension of the original Emerald. In the Oraz dimension, you're able to destroy the meteor before it crashes. But in the original dimension, the meteor randomly appears and does land, creating Birth Island, the new home to Deoxys. Now you may be catching my drift. Oraz did include events from the original Emerald, but altered as Oraz takes place in a slightly different dimension. If Delta Emerald ever was created, the only unique thing that could be added is that epic cutscene between the Ancient Weather Trio, but in their Primal and Mega forms. And while that is something I really want to experience, it seems like Game Freak made Oraz the way they did to avoid remaking Emerald, as saddening as it sounds. Now I know what you're saying, what about the final Steven battle? Apparently, the biggest reason that people are claiming would lead to an Emerald remake is the Battle Frontier. The other half of the fans believe that it will become a future DLC for Oraz, but to me, I don't see either of that happening. It's really unfortunate that Game Freak didn't bring back the Battle Frontier or even the Battle Tower in Oraz, but rather its predecessor, the Battle Resort. But it's all for a reason, whether you'll take it as a good reason or a bad reason, and I'll save that for a future video before I sail way too far away from this one. In short, it doesn't seem like there will be a Delta Emerald, and Game Freak may have set the bar pretty high with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, but I've got a good feeling that the next games may even exceed Oraz. But anyways, feel free to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and let me know your thoughts about Oraz, essentially including Delta Emerald in it, and Delta Emerald probably not happening. I've got a ton of videos like this coming out over the next few weeks, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Okay, if Emerald was remade, it would be Delta Emerald. Not Theta Emerald, not Sigma Emerald, no. Occasionally people tell me I'm wrong for calling it Delta Emerald, so let me say it here. Rayquaza is referred to as the Delta. You meet it in the Delta episode where it Mega Evolves, summoning the Delta stream. And oh, would you look at that, it's Lambda. No, it's Delta.